All right, good morning and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Riga Business School and Adizes Institute Worldwide. This morning, we want to spend some time talking about what companies have learned through this COVID crisis. And we want to involve you, the audience, so please write your questions in the chat. Now, to help me better understand what we've learned from this crisis, we have with us Sasha Kelberg from the company Groglass. Sasha founded the company in 2004, and it actually took about 5 years before you had production. Isn't that right, Sasha?
Yes, indeed. We started a greenfield operation. Hi, everybody. It was a spin-off from an existing institute, Siderbe, which existed for some 50 years. Now, we had to first do R&D to prove the concept, then we had to build the machine. We had to design the machine, we had to build the building around it, and so it took quite some time, indeed. And then it took yet quite some time to start making money with it. By 2000, we opened our doors 2008, made our first delivery in 2009, and we made our first profit in 2012. So,
and tell us a little bit about what you actually produce.
Yeah, our product is probably better shown than told about. So I don't know if you can see, one of these glasses has reflection and the other one does not.
A little closer to us. Yeah. Ah, there it is.
There it is. So you can see that it's the same piece of glass, but one has been coated over by atomic deposition to eliminate reflections. And so behind one, you can see the object somewhat, and then behind the second one, you can see the object a lot better.
And so where is your glass used?
Most of our glass is used in exactly that type of application, which is picture framing. When you have an object or an artwork to frame, you would walk down to your local store, a local custom frame shop, and they will offer you regular glass, or they'll offer you fuzzy glass, which is matte, or invisible. And the invisible glass is where we have about 70% of the European market now.
Oh, that's great. And you do a lot of work with museums as well, isn't that right?
Correct. Museums, though, represent only about 10% of the available wall space. So obviously, we're much more interested in households.
Okay.
But we also work in we're fairly diversified. That more than 40% of our business is for electronic displays, which are used outside, as well as supermarket refrigerators. So we're not only...
So people can see their beer with no reflection.
Exactly. And they can...
All right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this crisis has affected your operations?
Yes, of course. I should preface that it's different for every business, and every business has its specifics. When the demand dries up, for some people, it's an immediate decision to stop. And for us, it's not, because we have to keep the full scope of operations going, production, in order to convert our raw product into the finished goods. And the finished goods obviously are much more valuable to us. Therefore, we had in March, we had made the decision to continue production, and we will keep producing until middle of June. It's affected our demand significantly because most of the frame shops, and about which I was talking in the beginning of this conversation, have been closed as non-essential businesses for almost 2 months. So obviously there's no business coming from them. So that part of our business has suffered dramatically. However, the business-to-business side, refrigerators, supermarkets, and electronic displays have seen some decrease, but not dramatic. So we have to balance our production and make sure that we do a production stop at some point.
And that production stop then is coming in June?
Yes, that's. I think we have the luxury of planning and having some cash, so we can actually plan when we stop. That I'll talk maybe later about that as importance of what to do in a crisis. But we were well prepared, and we had the luxury of choosing when to make our stop. So we actually have invested some cash into our stock. And then instead of stopping when everything stopped, and we will choose to stop in summer in order to draw down that stock, and then restart again in the fall.
Uh-huh. And so people will go on vacations at that point. Is that the way you've worked it?
This is a good question. We had faced a very difficult decision of how to deal with the stop, and I think because we have been supporting our employees all these years, we've been very good to them, and we've been a very fair employer, paying all the salaries on time and in full. That when we told our employees about this difficult situation, Latvia doesn't have a law for temporary leave. So we had to offer them a full leave with a letter of intent to restart again in the fall. And by law, we have to pay compensations for tenure. Many of our employees have worked with us for 5-10 years, and so these compensations would equal to 2 to 3 months of salary, which would make the temporary stop ineffective. So we had openly told our employees our situation and asked them to be on our side and to help us out. So more than 90% have signed leave without compensation. And they really helped the company. They have stepped in. Everybody who stayed took a salary cut. And we're focused on growing our business with a skeleton crew over the summer, and then in order to invite everybody back in the fall.
Okay. So I've already got one question from the audience, and that is, what will the new Groglass look like coming out of the crisis?
Yeah.
What will be the new normal?
What would be the new normal? I think it's a question both to the world and to Groglass. We don't know how the world will look like. It will certainly be different. And Groglass, let me tell you how we're using this time in order to prepare for the uncertainty of coming out of it. I don't pretend to be an oracle, but what I know for sure that something is going to be different. And in order to meet the different world, a company has to be flexible and lean. And so this is how we're spending our summer. We're spending our summer rewriting all of our processes, making sure that they're efficient, focusing on quality management, as well as working to make sure we're positioned to meet any type of demand that comes along, any type of new demand. So we're working on several new products, several new markets, to make sure that when the world wakes up, that we're able to take advantage of as many opportunities as possible. I'm not sure if that's a succinct enough answer. So we're conserving cash. We are making sure that we have many new avenues of meeting new demand, so new products, and we are working on how to come out of it leaner than we came into it. So instead of gaining Corona speck, a couple of extra pounds on the quarantine, we're actually working on losing them.
Okay. So you're talking about a lot of change that you're putting in place. And what is it about? I've heard through these webinars that I've done from multiple people that this crisis has pushed them into implementing changes they've been talking about for a long time. I had one company that said they've been talking for 2 years about moving to remote work, and they always had excuses why they couldn't do it. But as soon as the crisis hit, they did it in 2 days. Other companies have talked about moving out employees that weren't as productive as they could have been. What is it about change and management? What does that tell us about why it takes a crisis to get these things done?
It's a good question. I think, of course, it has the catalyst effect of just showing us that we can do things that we were afraid to do. And actually, when everybody's, it's one thing when you do it in a vacuum. All of a sudden, Groglass comes out and says that we will now do remote work. It's a completely other picture when the whole world says, okay, there's no other way for us to meet but online, so let's do it. And of course, it legitimizes this mode of communication. It was extremely difficult for us to not meet our customers face to face. Conservative, German family business, they would not make a deal over Zoom, but now they do because they have no other choice. And this crisis normalized digital communication, so that's great. And I think it's not just any crisis. I think this crisis, which has pushed us to our respective countries and left the only mode of communication. So this crisis has catalyzed certain things like automation, digital communication, digital everything. Another thing, I think some people work better in crisis mode. It's very human when you have a deadline. You're amazed. I'm sure your students may relate to this, that on the eve before they're due to submit their paper to you, they've been more productive than they have been the whole semester. It's human. So we mobilize our resources. It has its costs at the end, but we mobilize our resources and we solve many problems at the same time. So I think that's another reason. It's just in crisis, we're fueled by adrenaline or something, and we're willing to take maybe risks and take faster decisions. One final reason is that many new great ideas are born out of chaos, I think. I don't know, I can give you an example of you're building a castle out of Lego. And it's a multi-day, a multi-week process, and you've built a structure and you're spending your days, this would be great to put an extra spire here or an extra window here, but you're not going to change the structure of the castle, even though you see some of the faults that you have built into the structure, but you're not going to just take it apart. And then your younger brother runs in and stomps all over it. And now when you're rebuilding this castle again, you're probably going to take into consideration all those things you wished you would have done earlier. And so this crisis, I think, is a good way for us to rebuild the way we thought we would have built a business earlier or all along. And we've learned things from operating the business that we want to do differently. And now it gives us extra breathing room and an extra excuse to approach it differently. So I think these are three reasons in why I feel businesses are growing out of this crisis and doing things now instead of doing it before.
So how many people are working with you?
Right now we have 140 people. Then over the summer we will go down to about 50. This will be R&D, sales, and just essential personnel, which is focused on growth, on creating new products, on creating new opportunities, new markets, and then our production will return in the fall.
Okay. So I want to follow up on this Lego example because, your little brother comes in and stomps on it and you rebuild it. You're rebuilding by yourself. So you can do whatever you want in rebuilding that castle. In your company to rebuild it, you've got 160 people that have to work together to rebuild it. So how is it that you get them to work together instead of working against each other? Because, when you go to rebuild, everybody has their own ideas about how to rebuild. In different departments, how do you pull them together to all rebuild the same, move in the same direction?
It's more a question, probably not necessarily about this crisis, but about leadership in general. How do you get people to move in one direction and do it harmoniously? I think it starts from human motivation. This starts from making sure that everyone is engaged. And how do people stay engaged? This is an age-old question, but I tend to feel that people are not engaged necessarily and motivated by purely the financial gain. They get engaged by an idea and by having a reason to come to work higher than themselves, higher than just putting bread on the table. get motivated about, in our particular business, it's bringing, beauty to millions of people. Millions of people use our glass to frame something which is very important to them. And so when the line worker, who is maybe the lowest paid, but he is the last person who sees the piece of glass before it goes into the box, that line worker knows that, it depends on him whether the customer will see a fault in the glass or not. And it's super important. And that person feels that, 1 million people per year get to see his product that he touched. And so it's about creating and communicating those things to people. And besides our product, I mean, our very existence supports 140 families. And it's said that one manufacturing job actually gives birth to another 8 jobs in the service sector. So we create value here for potentially 1,000 families in Latvia. And that also is very motivating to people, that the fact that they come to work and they do good work and they create value, it stays here and makes our country a better place.
And so this idea that what Groglass does helps 1,000 families, people throughout your company understand that?
We communicate on a regular basis. We have various modes of communication, newsletters, and because we have shift employees, so it's tough to get everybody in the same place at the same time, but we try to do that periodically as well. So we do communicate that. We have defined our values, which are displayed everywhere, I think when you ask, how do people move in the same direction, especially during the crisis, the fact that we have work, we have goals, we have the future, people are motivated to get it done and to move in the same direction.
So what you've been saying really is that the reason you can move through this crisis is you had a certain type of company in the first place that could better deal with this change. And so one idea I want to put out there is that this crisis basically has just been accelerated change. Right? We deal with change all the time, but this crisis has pushed us to a place and a type of change we're not accustomed to. But companies deal with change all of the time. And when things change, we have a different situation all of a sudden. And it can be a small change, somebody doesn't show up to work, a piece of machinery breaks down, or bigger changes like we're going through in the world right now. And out of this change, we get challenges, we get problems, we get opportunities. And as a manager, as a management team, your job is basically to deal with those problems and opportunities caused by change. Right? And that's what's going on through this COVID crisis, is we all face the same changes. We're all facing the same challenge for the most part. And the companies that deal with it the best seem to be the ones that can pull together and get things done with a common direction. And so it seems like it's a certain type of culture where people can actually work together. And so I'd just like to get your response to that.
I think we shouldn't forget the basics. We can definitely state that there's a certain type of company and culture, but as Warren Buffett says, that when the tide moves down, you see who's not wearing any pants. And it's important. I think we've been fairly conservative in our planning. I think you have to be prepared for the crisis anytime. And you have to be, make sure that you have a cash cushion to have that flexibility, because we can speak great things about our culture, but if we don't have any cash to pay our people, then we're dead in the water. So, or if we're over leveraged, during the good times, it may feel to be so good to just take that extra loan and invest in those, in that work improvement or automation or things like that. It's very tasty, but you have to be planning for crisis. You have to make sure that when the crisis hits, that you're not caught with your pants down. Next thing is first thing we did when the crisis hit is, safety of the people. People are your most important thing. So the first meetings were not about cash preservation. It was about how do we make our people safe. So whoever we could send home, we sent home, and we continued operations for skeleton crew by giving them, but we tried to minimize the risks by not letting them take public transport, by taxing people in, but making sure we have car shares. At that time, it seemed like a prudent thing by disinfecting. Then when you make sure that you have your people safe and you have your production stabilized, then you have to do scenario planning. So you plan for the worst case. What is the worst case that can happen? You try to brainstorm it, and then you make sure that you have a scenario where you're surviving in that case. Then you have several triggers to go from plan A to plan B to plan C to plan Z. And only then can you, I think, start talking about culture and about common direction and things like that. So I just want to say that I agree that it's a certain culture that deals with change, and change is actually one of our values that has been defined a long time ago, and it says, be happy with change. We've been trying to communicate that to employees a long time ago, and change is not bad; it's actually good. And it seems like one of our values is coming very useful during this crisis.
Okay, and another aspect of this is being able to deal with this change. It seems like this is really could be your competitive advantage, because you and your competitors all face the same changes right now. And coming out of this crisis, it's going to be who's best prepared, who's thought through the change, done all this scenario planning and all of this, and made the changes which you've been talking about in becoming more lean and things like that really is going to then drive your business. Or should. Hopefully, that's the plan anyway, right?
That's the plan, and I think that one thing that will probably make us successful against competitor is not to underestimate our competitor, because our competitors are very smart people. They are, I'm sure, going through very similar motions of conserving cash, of making sure they're strong and investing in real new opportunities that arise out there. And some things they will be faster than us, and some things they won't. But one thing I've noticed that a lot of people, they do the basics and they say, okay, I'm so lean and I'm mean and I've got all these new products, and then to only find out that their competitor has thought 2 moves ahead. So to me, I'm paranoid. So I think underestimating your competitor is probably the biggest mistake at the moment.
So one lesson is to be paranoid to some extent.
Be paranoid, survive.
Okay. And the other aspect that I see in this, that companies that are going to come out of this better are ones that they have strong teamwork inside the company, because they need the energy to be able to drive these changes that you're talking about. And so they work together well. They have a lot of trust and respect for each other, because without that, what tends to happen is they don't seek each other out to solve problems. Right? If you don't respect somebody, you don't go look for them to help you solve a problem. You do it on your own, and then you do what's best for you, not what's best for the team. And so when that energy, is optimized internally, the energy between people, there's more available to deal with making changes in the company so that you're prepared to deal with the market.
That's true, Greg. And I think what you said earlier is very true in this case as well, that this crisis it's just another bump on the road. It's just exacerbates things that we should be doing all along. So just like in the peaceful times, it's important to have teamwork. It's maybe more important to have it now. Just like in peaceful times, it's important to do good planning and to be lean and to be mean. It's just a little bit more important now. So crisis management is when all of the things that are important to do in the peaceful times are even more important now. Yes, of course, and teamwork is important. People unite. Once I said it once that it's people unite around an idea or against an idea a lot better than anything else. And those ideas should be strong, and they should be, the purpose should be higher than oneself. Then teamwork happens.
And the other aspect of this is, you talked about leadership and building a culture and those things, but I don't want to underestimate the work that you've done before this crisis on alignment of the organization through objectives, because I know you've done this, objectives from the top to the bottom, on aligning those things, because what that does is it helps to remove a lot of, it builds transparency. It removes a lot of frustration when people aren't sure about who's responsible for what and what should they get done and things like that, so that they can get their work done. And when that frustration creeps in, people start looking for people to blame, that the workflow doesn't get done correctly and things like that. And I know that you've done a lot of work in that area.
True, we've done a lot of work in this area. We've attempted to do a lot of work in this area, and we can be so much better in this area than we are. I remember we had I can point out several times in history we would do this, and we would go to a certain level, and then it wouldn't get finished, wouldn't cascade all the way down, and the KPIs just wouldn't be exactly aligned, and we're still defining KPIs by March, when they should be defined by January, and it's a never-ending cycle. And I can't point to our company as this success story in that. I think we'd like to be much better. Because difficult. You're focused on producing a product and getting it to the market and making sure it's good quality. And these processes of quality management are super important, but they inevitably take the back seat from year to year. And that's why this crisis is also good to clean up a lot of processes.
So again, going back to this idea of managing energy in a company, right? Because you need people's energy to get things done. And what you talked about was the leadership aspect, the vision aspect, and that actually gives energy to people, right? When they realize, that we're helping 1,000 families, when we're creating something that clients really need and that they can use, when they're creating value, that gives them energy. Mm-hmm. But on the other side of that, what you're talking about now, or what we're talking about in developing processes and cascading objectives and goals, that actually robs energy. It takes a lot of energy.
It takes a lot of energy to do it, but eventually it frees people to do what they like. Nobody likes to do rote, kind of boring things. And by automating and by writing things down, you're getting rid of those rote, mundane things. You're also getting rid of ambiguity. So this little investment gets rid of 100 conversations of people coming to each other and say, how do we actually do it? Well, it's written right here how we do it, and if it's step to the right, to the left, then we write another process. Of course, you can't write everything out, but having the skeleton of things, how you do things, written out and agreed, it's very helpful because it takes away a lot of unnecessary guesswork and frustration from people, especially new people, when you onboard them. So yes, it's a little investment into the future. It's a little boring, but it makes the future a lot more exciting because people can focus on value-added work.
But then it follows that what has to come first is that mission of what we're trying to achieve, so that you have the energy then to engage in these processes and cascading of goals and things like that, which are more boring and not so much fun.
Absolutely, Greg. I'd be very interested to hear actually what was said in other webinars about how people have dealt with this change and what people have learned.
So, and that's kind of what I'm doing right now, is summarizing what's come out of those webinars. I mean, we've heard of companies that were able to make changes quickly because of the crisis, because people are pushed to do that. They have no choice, as you mentioned. We've heard about companies that were able to get employees to take salary cuts, as you've talked about. So many of the same things that you've talked about. Companies have gone through this crisis management, and a lot of them, you know, they've been forced to do it, and they've done a pretty good job. That being said, there are certainly industries that have been hit really hard where they haven't been able to make these changes just because of, you know, things beyond their control. And the travel industry is one example, right? That they have things way beyond their control that they have to shut down. They have no income and no business right now.
Yeah. Well, this crisis is very much about things beyond our control. You know, everybody says, well, it's nothing that we did wrong, but it's something external. So, you know, at least the people don't feel as responsible for this. But it's shown us that the world is unpredictable, and we have to be able to plan for every eventuality and make sure that we prepare it for these things.
Uh-huh. And you know, those uncontrollable problems, they are out there. They're actually not even problems. They're just situations, because a problem we can actually do something about. We should be able to solve. A situation like, you know, this COVID crisis it's a situation we have to figure out how to deal with. What we have control over is having a strategy or a scenario for how to deal with COVID. Right? If it starts to rain, we can't control that, but we could have an umbrella. So what else have you learned out of this crisis about the resiliency of your company?
Besides the things that I've mentioned about, you know, having the basics covered, making sure that you have enough cash and you have you're planning your scenarios and you survive. I've probably also learned that you know, it's a cliche when they say people is the most important resource you have, because every single thing that we were able to do, it was because of the decisions of people, and people could have done it differently. If we didn't care for them, and if we didn't take care all along during the peaceful times, people wouldn't be as inclined to step up and help the company and help themselves in the difficult times. So I think that's a big lesson learned for us. Yeah.
So, you know, you mentioned that's kind of a cliche. Let me ask you a question. Would you rather lose all of your people or all of your technology?
Yeah, of course, all the technology, because with people you can rebuild the technology. So the knowledge is in people's heads. It's in, you know, a motivated and a loyal employee is really an invaluable resource. So, but you have to work to make them that. So they just don't come from the street. They come from history of working together with you, and you making difficult decisions and good decisions that they see, and it's a relationship.
Uh-huh. So I've got another question here. Is crisis management and crisis communication, are those things different to you? If so, then how?
Well, yes, they are different. I mean, crisis management is something you do in a small group of key stakeholders in the company, and a crisis always involves difficult decisions. And how you communicate those difficult decisions is also a strategy. I tend to believe that transparency is still the best approach, even in a crisis, and you have to tell people straight up if a difficult decision is about them. But they will remember that, and they will appreciate, I think, that as much as you have decided has been communicated. Yet there are some things that are, not necessary to communicate widely. Some of the financial intricacies, or how you're planning to survive and make sure that you meet all your financial obligations. These, not necessarily. But I think crisis management is about approach, and communication is what you say to the people, which they are.
What are some of the ways that you communicate to your staff these decisions?
So how we've communicated, the most difficult decisions is we asked everybody to come over. We went to our backyard with 2-meter distance to one another. It's 140 people. It's difficult to even have everybody in the same place. I took a microphone and we spoke. So this is just the simplest. I've heard of several companies doing these things over WhatsApp or over email, and I, heard that they didn't turn out so well. That people want to see you, and they want to be near each other, and they want to look you in the eye when they're making a difficult decision. And then we spoke with every single employee. So we divided our management team, 4 people, and we have had 30 meetings each, 40 meetings each during one day after the communication. Super important to look people in the eye and speak with them. I don't know what we would have done if we had 1,000 people. It would have been probably very, but with 140, it was still possible to speak with every single person.
And another question that's come up is, how has your supply chain been affected?
Not so much. We have, because of a lot of our purchases are long-term, so glass is a commodity, and in this crisis, actually, you cannot stop a glass producer because it's a big oven that melts glass, and if you stop it, then you have to fully rebuild the whole factory around the glass which is solidified. So the glass has to be liquid for 10 to 12 years. So if you stop the production, then it's very difficult. You have to rebuild the whole thing. So they keep producing, and they throw the glass back in the oven right now without demand. So they're very eager to sell. So that hasn't affected our ability to procure glass. Other products that we have, some high-tech targets and things like that, we purchase them, well ahead of time, and they last us a long time. So that hasn't been affected. Electricity, that's another one of our inputs, also has been fine. Also went down. We haven't faced any difficulties with supply chain, I should say.
Okay. So looking through this or listening to you today, a couple of things that I've gotten out of this is that one is that's very important is to have a type of company that's able to deal with crises. Planning is quite important, and to be able to bring people together to do good planning, you need to have some kind of mission, vision, and values that you're working towards. And the other thing that I hear is very important is that you're able to build through processes, communication that helps people to builds transparency, helps with uncertainty, creates a safe environment, things like that. Yes?
Absolutely. And to bring another metaphor, I think a lot of us have learned a lot about personal relationships, over this crisis. I think there's nothing different about building a company or building a successful homestead, where you have to make sure you have some savings. We have seen that people who live, spend a lot and live from salary to salary, they've faced much more difficulty in this crisis than people who have been saving and making sure that they have extra cash. People who have thought about alternative supply chains. They have a country home where they grow their potatoes. They have also found it much easier to weather this storm. They moved out there and they had alternative things to do. And so these are potential diversification of your supply chain. You don't only go to the store when we couldn't go to the store. And then when you speak about values, is when you're locked in with your family for a week, it's a lot more harmonious to be together when you have good communication, when you're open with each other, when you don't bear grudges, and it's the same thing. So I do encourage people to think that business world is not so different from their home world. And if the same way they build a successful home is the same way they should approach business. It's not different. One shouldn't become all of a sudden a different person when they leave their home.
That's a really good point, because I actually have students that approach me and say, how do you manage in business playing this game where you have to be somebody else? And they think, somehow you have to act more professional. Well, you have to be professional, but to play a role in business. And it's really about finding yourself and being yourself to be a good manager.
Yeah, that's more of a Hollywood construct, I think, to say that you have to fit some kind of an image when you're a business person. You really don't have to. And I think people relate to you much better if you're yourself, if you're human, and you make decisions in a similar way. Of course, they will not always be the most profitable decisions, but in the long term, they will win you loyalty and good relations with your employees, because you need that when the crisis hits. When everything is growing, people cut corners, but when the crisis hits, you need the employees to help you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, great, Sasha. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Excellent. It's helpful, and I'd wish your students the best. This is a great time to be in school.
Okay. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you, Sasha. Some really good lessons today, and good luck to everybody going forward.
Very well. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.